All right, everyone, it's 10:45. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm Adeline DeYoung, I'm CCL's project specialist, and I'm going to be introducing our next keynote speakers. Before I do that, I want to give you a heads up on our schedule leading up to lunch. So after our keynote ends, Leslie Beatty is going to come on stage, and she's going to tell you about CCL's marketing strategy. After that, Ashley Hunt-Martirano is going to come up and give you some information about this afternoon's breakout sessions, and then we will let you go eat lunch. So Ted Halstead, who will be joining us on stage in a minute, founded the Climate Leadership Council, which is an international policy institute that was founded to promote a carbon dividends climate solution. At its core, this solution is very similar to our own. While there are differences in the details of the Climate Leadership Council's carbon dividends proposal and CCL's carbon fee and dividend proposal, both share the same fundamental goals of emission reductions and revenue-neutral dividends. As chairman and CEO of the Climate Leadership Council, Ted Halstead has mobilized a surprising group of high-profile supporters behind a carbon dividends plan, including top companies, environmental NGOs, and opinion leaders from across the political spectrum. After his keynote, he will be joined on stage by two students who are expanding the movement onto college campuses. Students for Carbon Dividends founder and president Alexander Posner, and S4CD Vice President Kira O'Brien. So please join me in welcoming Ted Halstead to the stage.
Thank you very, very much for the warm welcome. I have to tell you, there are only 2 times in my life that I've received a bit of a standing ovation before even opening my mouth. And the last time was at this event here last year. So that is encouraging for people to actually come back. But the main reason I came back is because you are the army that is going to get this plan past the finish line. It's becoming increasingly clear that a dividend solution is the inevitable climate solution, the only one that can build a bipartisan climate breakthrough. From my perspective, it's not a question of when this is going to happen, it's not a question of whether, but when. And you all here have a huge role to play in accelerating that timeline. I understand there are about 1,400 of you here, which is fantastic. I want to start by commending your leadership, which is really tremendous and has brought this incredible group together. We love working with Mark. Mark, where are you? Somewhere around here. Mark is fantastic. A terrific inspiration for all of you and a terrific colleague. I also want to recognize Danny, who we work with closely on your domestic work, and Joe, who we work with closely on international work. In fact, I had the pleasure to spend time with Joe at the Bonn Climate Conference. It was my first time at an international climate conference, UN conference. Joe was kind enough to take me under his wing, show me the ropes, and so forth. So eternally grateful. So I understand that this year you have a growing number of conservative members. In fact, I'm told that there are over 100 from 40 different states. And let's be proud of that. So please raise your hand. Hold on. Please raise your hand if you're one of those conservative members. In fact, so let's see if we can tip those scales a little bit. Let me suggest to you what a climate conservative is, and I'm going to give you a very simple definition. Forget all other matters of public policy, and let's just focus on climate, which is our theme here. Let me define a climate conservative as someone who believes that markets are more efficient than regulations in solving the climate problem. Now, from that definition, let's try this again. How many climate conservatives are there in the room? Whoa, okay. I see more than half of the hands going up. That is very encouraging. See, Mark, you are, in fact, a conservative climate organization, just like us. Okay, in my brief time with you, I wanted to go over 2 major topics. One is we have a report coming out soon on the top 10 reasons for dividends, something that might be, you all know this already, but might be an interesting prep for your sessions tomorrow. If we can put that one slide up. So let's quickly go through these. These are the top 10 reasons. One, it is the most popular climate policy. We have a poll in the field now that we'll release at some point in the next month, and it shows that dividends is by far the most popular climate solution. Second, carrots over sticks. You know, for too long, the message of carbon tax has been, we're going to make your energy prices go up. Sticks do not work very well. Carrots are far better in motivating people. And, you know, when James Baker talks about this plan, he says it is not a carbon tax, it's a dividend to the American people. It's an opportunity to fundamentally remessage a carbon tax as a dividend, and that makes all the difference. In fact, it fundamentally changes the cost-benefit time horizon of climate mitigation by saying you get a benefit in the here and now. Next, we have the most equitable climate solution. Well, that you all know, roughly 70% of American households would come out ahead under this plan, which is a huge selling point, so that I'm sure you know quite well. Fourth, it is the most durable climate solution. You know, there's this misconception in Washington, D.C. that the challenge is to pass a carbon tax on a one-time basis, and it's not that important if it increases every year. That is fundamentally wrong, as we've seen in British Columbia. So the goal really is to pass a growing carbon tax, one that goes up every year. And for that, you need durability built in. And the only way to ensure that durability is the dividend, which creates the policy hook. Once that the public likes that dividend, you have the sustainability of the program, which is absolutely essential. Fifth on this list is regulatory simplification. I'm going to put that to the side for a minute and come back to it in a couple moments. When you're on Capitol Hill, a sixth argument is this is a pro-growth plan for a whole number of reasons, including the fact that it's putting money in the hands of the Americans most likely to spend it, which boosts aggregate demand. There's also this great argument that it provides a stimulatory effect and a multiplier effect, just as the Federal Reserve likes to provide forward guidance to influence future policy. If the business industry believes that the carbon tax will continue increasing over time and be sustainable due to the dividends, they will start investing now based on the carbon price many years in the future. It creates an immediate stimulatory impact. It restores trust in government. I mean, if we think of where we're at now compared to, say, a year ago, trust in government is at a nearly all-time low. Why? Because this is rooted in a populist sentiment that the system is rigged against the average American by the wealthy and the elite. So, fair enough. The best way to counter that is to offer an alternative, such as a carbon dividends plan, which basically changes the rules of the road and says, this is a deal based on a simple, logical premise. The more you pollute, the more you pay. The less you pollute, the more you come out ahead. This tips the scales towards the little guy, towards the masses, at the expense of the elite, and provides a strong populist argument. So a carbon dividends plan is not only the most popular climate solution, it is also the most populist. The positive feedback loop. So, you know, there's a widespread sense out there. You ask Americans, so, you know, what about climate change? They'll say, yeah, it's a problem, but, you know, it's complicated, it's costly, it takes a long time to solve. Well, that's because the feedback loop is negative, right? The sense is solving it will hurt us economically, will hurt the economy, hurt our pocketbooks. What a carbon dividends plan does is it flips that on its head by creating a positive feedback loop. The higher the carbon tax, the lower the emissions, the larger the dividend. That positive feedback loop is a complete game changer. Borrowing bonus, number 9 up here. We're toying with the idea of we're exploring this on a preliminary basis of letting Americans borrow against their future dividend income streams for specific purposes. We like that? Okay. For specific purposes, for example, investing in buying a fuel-efficient or electric car, investing in more efficient appliances, putting solar panels on your roof, and so forth. If you think about it, roughly half of Americans have less than $500 to their name in case of an economic emergency. When you start offering the American people a family of four, roughly $2,000 per year in carbon dividends. That is very, very significant. And if you can borrow against it to make long-term investments in green technologies, it's a double win. Finally, it closes Pandora's box. Pandora's box is something that was experienced by Washington State, and that is that if you open up the carbon tax uses to any type of revenue, well, there'll be interest groups behind each one of them, but you will never get bipartisan support. You will get what one interest group favors, one or two others will dislike, and you will never be able to get bipartisan consensus on any use of revenue other than a dividend. That is the common denominator. Everything else will make it unmanageable. So you will have Republicans wanting to cut corporate income taxes or pay down the deficit. You'll have Democrats wanting to invest in green technologies or pay for climate mitigation. But these sides will not meet. Where these sides can meet is around the dividend, which is why you're all here promoting a dividend plan. So I hope that this helps as you advocate tirelessly tomorrow. Now, I want to spend my last 5 minutes coming back to the regulatory simplification pillar of the plan. This is, to be candid, the main difference between the CCL plan and the CLC plan. The Baker-Schultz carbon dividends plan is based on a grand bargain of trading carbon regulations for a robust and growing carbon price. Now, I want to make a couple arguments to you about why this is an essential trade in getting climate legislation through. Let me start with the intellectual argument. As it seems that at least half the room agrees, a market-based solution is far more efficient and cost-effective in solving climate change than regulation. You know, some would say, when I studied at the Kennedy School, the main thing they try to teach everybody is, let not the perfect be the enemy of the good. So some of you here will say, okay, well, let not the perfect be the enemy of the good, therefore, let's accept regulatory rollback as the price for a carbon tax. But you know what? From my perspective, the carbon tax without the regulation is the perfect. It is the perfect because it has impeccable economic logic behind it. You're all here because you believe in a carbon tax. If you take that to its next step, the reason that you ought to believe in it is because it is by far the most cost-effective solution. It's the only one that is immediately economy-wide, and we're coming out with some new numbers in the next month that will show that if you compare a plan like ours to, say, all the Obama regs combined, you get multiple times the emissions reductions. So from an economic point of view, I believe that the argument is unassailable that this is the perfect solution. And you know, Greg Mankiw, who's a professor at Harvard and one of the co-authors of our plan and has written the textbook that is read by the majority of students on, I think it's the best-selling economics textbook in history. What he says is, you know, most economists go up and they present a plan and they say, well, this is not a panacea. However, he says this plan is the closest he has ever seen to a panacea. That is the economic logic. So on intellectual grounds, I believe there's a very strong argument for pairing a carbon tax with a phase-out of most climate regulations. Now let me go to the political case. The political case is that you will never get there without this grand bargain. A carbon tax with dividends by itself is sort of the dream of Democrats and environmentalists. And fair enough, but you know what? It will never pass on a partisan basis, and it will never last if it is put forth on a partisan basis. Throughout American history, we have seen that for policies to last, they need to be bipartisan. And what interests Republicans and businesses is this core component, which is reducing regulations because the market is so much more efficient. Why is this so key? What do businesses care about? Businesses want regulatory certainty. They're perfectly fine accepting a carbon tax in exchange for regulatory certainty. For Republicans, this offers a popular and bipartisan way to pass regulatory relief, significant regulatory relief. Without these elements, you will never get a bipartisan compromise, and I don't think you can ever get this past the finish line. You'll notice that the Climate Leadership Council started with Republican elder statesmen, with key businesses from the oil majors to the car majors to leading environmental groups. And the reason we were able to build this unusual coalition is because of all these pillars of our plan, including this grand bargain of a carbon tax in exchange for reducing regulations. So I would argue to you that if we're serious about this getting enacted in a bipartisan way, this is not only a necessary trade, but absolutely a winning trade from an environmental perspective. And I realize that this is outside the comfort zone of some of the members of the group, but I would urge you to think hard about this, because this is the difference between a plan that to some of you may sound good or may appeal to your partisan or ideological predispositions, and a plan that can actually pass. I believe it's the right policy, but I'm certain that it is the right politics. So please give that some thought.